66 years on the throne, over 100 children, and a face carved so deeply into stone that 3,000 years of desert wind could not erase it. When Ramesses II died around 1213 before Christ, he was approximately 90 years old, crippled by arthritis, his jaw riddled with abscesses, his spine curving under the weight of a body that had simply refused to stop. He had outlived 12 of his own crown princes. He had outlived his enemies, his wives, his rivals, and very nearly his own empire. And yet, when archaeologists pulled his linen-wrapped body from a hidden cache of royal mummies in 1881, his arms were still crossed in the posture of a god. How does a man born into a military family that seized power barely a generation earlier become the most enduring symbol of Pharaonic civilization itself? How does a young commander who nearly lost everything in a single afternoon at Kadesh transform that disaster into the greatest propaganda triumph the ancient world had ever seen? And what did it cost him across those decades of glory and slow decline to become not just a king, but a living deity? This is the complete story, not a summary, not a collection of famous moments. This is the full arc of an extraordinary life told from the beginning. We will start before Ramesses was born in an Egypt still reeling from the chaos of Akhenaten's religious revolution, where generals and viziers clawed their way to the throne, and a new dynasty was forged from ambition and military discipline. We will follow the boy prince as he learns war and scripture in the palaces of Memphis, rides his first chariot into Nubia beside his father, Seti, and accepts the double crown at roughly 24 years of age. We will stand with him on the plains beside the Arance River, where 2,500 Hittite chariots shattered his army, and only his own reckless courage kept him alive. We will watch him turn that near catastrophe into carved stone and painted verse, then negotiate history's first known peace treaty with the very empire that almost destroyed him. We will walk through the temples he raised at Abu Simbel, through the glittering capital of Ramesses, through the painted chambers of Nefertiti's tomb, where color still breathes on the walls after 32 centuries. And we will sit with him in his final years, an old man surrounded by ghosts, burying son after son, performing rituals with hands that could barely grip the crook and flail, watching the borders of his empire quietly contract, while the world he built began its long transformation into legend. This is a man whose name the Greeks reshaped into Ozandius, whose reign may echo behind the Exodus narrative, whose mummy was issued a modern passport to fly to Paris for conservation. His monuments were so massive that an international coalition spent 4 years cutting Abu Simbel from a cliff face and reassembling it above the rising waters of a new lake. Shelley wrote a poem about his fallen colossus and called it a meditation on the vanity of power. But the irony is that Ramesses won. His name did not vanish. His face did not crumble. He built eternity, and eternity held. The truth behind that achievement is more complex, more human, and more astonishing than any myth. We will separate what the inscriptions prove from what tradition invented, what his body reveals from what his temples proclaim, and what it meant to be both a man and a god in a world where the two were never supposed to be the same thing. If you're drawn to complete journeys through the lives that shaped civilization, subscribe and stay close. Each week we bring back one immortal name and reveal the real human being who carried it. Now let us begin not with the god king, but with the world that made him. A world of shattered temples and rising generals where a dynasty was born from nothing and a child was forged for a throne he would hold longer than any pharaoh in memory. The desert wind moves through empty halls. Sand drifts across painted floors where no priest walks, no incense burns, no hymn rises to the ceiling. The city of Archaeton stands abandoned on the east bank of the Nile, its mud brick walls already crumbling, its grand boulevards given over to silence. A king once built this place to honor a single god, the Arton, the sun disk, and in doing so, he nearly destroyed Egypt itself. Akhenaten's revolution had lasted barely 17 years. He had closed the temples of Ammon, scattered the priesthoods, moved the capital from Thebes to this desolate plain in Middle Egypt, and declared that he alone could intercede with the divine. When he died around 1326, before the Common Era, he left behind a kingdom fractured at its foundations. The empire's vassals in Syria and Canaan sent desperate letters begging for military aid. That never came. The treasury was strained. The old gods were silent in their sealed sanctuaries. His successors scrambled to undo the damage. The boy king Tutankhamun, barely 10 years old at his accession, restored the cult of Ammon and returned the court to Thebes in Memphis. His famous restoration stellar describes temples fallen to ruin, their shrines overgrown, the gods turning their backs on Egypt. Yet Tutankhamun died young, around 1305, before the Common Era without an heir. The general I ruled briefly after him. Then came Horeb. Horem was no royal son. He was a military commander from Heracleopolis, a man who had risen through discipline and administrative brilliance. He seized the throne, erased Akhenaten's name from every monument he could find, dismantled the Arton temples at Kerak, and used their stone blocks as fill inside his own pylons. He reformed the courts, reorganized the army, punished corrupt officials, and restored order with an iron hand. His reign of perhaps 14 years rebuilt the machinery of the Egyptian state. But Horeb too died without a living heir. On his deathbed, or perhaps shortly before, Horemheb chose his successor, not from any royal bloodline, but from the ranks of the military, a vizier and general named Pernu, already elderly, already gray, a man from the eastern delta town of Avaris, with no claim to divinity except the trust of a dying king. Paramzu became Ramesses I, founding a dynasty that would reshape the ancient world. His reign lasted barely 2 years. The old soldier had time to begin a chapel at Abydos, and a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings before death claimed him around 1294, before the Common Era. But his purpose had been fulfilled. He had placed his son on the path to the throne. That son was Seti, where his father had been a transitional figure. Seti, I was a pharaoh of ambition and vision. He marched north into Canaan in his first year, reclaiming fortresses, reasserting Egyptian authority over trade routes that had slipped away during the Ammonite chaos. His war reliefs at Karnak showed disciplined columns of infantry and chariotry sweeping through the Levant, storming fortified towns, driving Shesubedewin from the frontier. He pushed as far as Kadesh on the Arents, briefly recapturing territory that bordered the expanding Hittite Empire. At home, Seti built with exquisite taste. His temple at Abydos remains among the most beautiful in Egypt. Its raised relief carving so fine it seems to breathe in torchlight. He restored monuments, reopened quarries, and filled the temples of Mun with offerings. The heresy was being buried stone by stone. In the military camps of the Delta, in the palace workshops of Memphis, a new Egypt was taking shape. Harder, more martial, defined by the officer class that now held power. And somewhere in this world, around 1303, before the Common Era, a child was born into the royal household. He was the second son of Sti and Queen Tuya, a boy who would inherit everything his grandfather had seized and his father had rebuilt. His elder brother would die young, leaving him alone in the path of destiny. He would be given command of soldiers before he could grow a beard. He would be crowned before the gods while his father still lived. And he would reign longer than any pharaoh in memory until his name became synonymous with Egypt itself. But all of that lay ahead beyond the horizon where the Nile meets the morning sun. The boy was born into stone and sunlight. The palace at Memphis stood where the delta began to fan outward, where the Nile split into its many fingers reaching for the sea. Here in mud-brick chambers plastered white and painted with lotus friezes, the child who would become the longest reigning pharaoh in Egyptian memory drew his first breath. His mother Tuya was no minor consort. She held the title of Great Royal Wife and came from a military family herself, a father a lieutenant of chariots. His father said he was already a man of war, lean and purposeful, a king who understood that Egypt's greatness had to be earned back campaign by campaign, temple by temple, inscription by inscription. The boy had an elder brother. The sources preserve almost nothing of him, not even a certain name. though some scholars suggest Nebchaset. What is known is that this brother died young, perhaps before his 10th year, and that his death rearranged the architecture of an empire. Ramesses, the second son, stepped into the vacancy. He was perhaps 10 years old when the full weight of dynastic expectation settled onto his narrow shoulders. His education began in the scribal schools attached to the Temple of Peter at Memphis. Young princes sat cross-legged on reed mats, grinding pigment into ink, learning to shape hieratic script on limestone flakes. The ostraca that survived by the thousands in Egyptian soil. They copied wisdom texts, administrative formulas, hymns to the gods. Literacy was power in Egypt, and a future king needed to read dispatches, understand grain tallies, and compose prayers that would be carved into eternity. But the reed pen was only half the curriculum. The other half was war. In the chariot yards north of Memphis, the prince learned to stand balanced in a lightweight vehicle of bent wood and leather drawn by 2 horses.